Okay. Good evening, everybody. This week is a double header. It's Parsha's Chukas and Balak. So we'll talk a little bit about Parsha of Chukas and a little bit about the Parsha of Balak. Now, the Torah begins Parsha's Chukas with the laws of the red heifer. Now, it means if somebody became in contact with a dead body, it's a very, very severe level of impurity. There are different stages and classifications of impurity. Tumas Mes, the impurity of a dead body, is the most severe of all the levels of impurity. It's the only impurity that a mikveh itself will not take off. You need also the ashes of the red heifer on the third day and the seventh day, and as the Torah enumerates all the deals. It is so strict that it's called Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is the statute, the most illogical mitzvah of the Torah. The Medrash says, the famous Medrash, that Shlomo HaMelech said, Amarti achakma v'irachoyka mimeni. Shlomo HaMelech was the smartest of all people. He understood the reason for all the illogical mitzvahs of Torah. He understood the reason for every single why meat and milk is forbidden and wool and linen. Every illogical mitzvah, he understood the reason. When it came to the mitzvah Parah Aduma, the red heifer, he said, as the pasuk says, Amarti achakma, I thought I would understand it, but it's far away from me. And even Shlomo HaMelech didn't understand it. The only one that did understand the mitzvah Parah Aduma was Moshe Rabbeinu, and it says, because it says, V'yikhu elecha, take for yourself a Parah Aduma, and Hashem said to Moshe, L'cha ani megala tam parah. To you, I will tell the reason of the Parah Aduma. But nobody else was able to understand the Parah Aduma. Now, there's a lot to talk about the Parah Aduma. Last year we spoke about certain things, and we're gonna talk about it a little differently a little bit. The word chukah in Hebrew means illogical mitzvah. Okay? Chukah in Hebrew also comes from the word chakak, which means engraved. Zeis chukas HaTorah, the Alter Rebbe explains in Chukat-Balak and Chassidic, that Torah, it's not enough to learn Torah. Torah needs to be engraved within the person. Now, to illustrate what is this concept of engraved Torah versus written Torah, there's a famous story. It's a well-known story. Maybe most of you have heard it, but it's a remarkable story. It happened in the early 1940s in Chicago. The previous Rebbe sent an emissary to Chicago to visit a certain wealthy person. And when the shliach of the Rebbe went to visit this wealthy person, he took with him the local rabbi in the community. So they meet with this wealthy guy, they speak with him, and then the shliach says, okay, going back home to the Rebbe. So the guy said, 1 minute, I'll give you a check. 1 minute, I'll give you a check. So the shliach of the Rebbe said, the previous Rebbe said, the Rebbe did not tell me to take money from you. He told me to talk to you. I spoke to you and I'm going back. I'm not taking a check from you. I'm not going to take a check from you. This blew the guy's mind because every guy with a beard, black hat, and this is asking always for money for institutions. And all of a sudden, this guy is coming and he's not even asking for money. So he says to the shliach, the rich man says to the emissary of the Rebbe, said, what type of people are you? So the rabbi of the city said, let me answer the question. I'll answer the question for you. He said, in the olden times, in the shtetls, so if it was a large city, they were able to employ a full-time sofer. Sofer is a scribe that writes tefillin, mezuzahs, checks them, fixes them, as everybody knows. So in the large cities, they were able to employ and afford a full-time sofer. What did they do in little townlets, the little shtetlach? So they had what was called a traveling sofer, traveling scribe. He would go, let's say this month he would be in this city and then in that city. And people knew that these weeks he's coming here. They would put away all the things that they needed to be checked and looked at. and the Sefer would come and, check it and move on to the next city. So he says like this, the rabbi explains to the rich man, it says in Svarim, it's called Megala Mukhes, it's a Kabbalah Sefer, that says Yisrael, the name Yisrael, is an acronym for Yesh Shishim Riboy Eisis LaTeira. There's 600,000 letters in the Torah. Even though there's only really 305,000 plus, but through various different methods, it says in Kabbalah, there's 600,000 letters in Torah. Each Jew, from the 600,000 general neshamas, every Jew has a letter in the Torah. Okay, so the rabbis explained to the wealthy man as follows. Every Jew has a letter in the Torah. Sometimes, though, the letter fades away from the parchment. What he meant to say is the Jew is fading away from Yiddishkeit. He's fading away from Judaism. So these rabbis are traveling scribes that go around to fix the letters of the Jews in the Sefer Torah. Now, they go out to bring people back to Yiddishkeit. The wealthy man liked the answer very much. He went back to the Rebbe. The shliach, when he came back to the Rebbe, went into the previous Rebbe for an audience, and he gave him a report of what happened. He told him the story that happened. The guy said, well, the whole story. So the previous Rebbe said to him, this is a remarkable concept we need to keep in mind. The Rebbe said to him, the rabbi was right, but he made one major mistake. And he explains there are two different types of letters. There's written letters, which is ink and parchment. Ink and parchment, the letter can rub out, the letter can fade away. Then there's a different type of letter. It's called an engraved letter. An engraved letter is part and parcel of the stone. It can never fade away. The only thing that can happen is the letter might be covered with dust, but it never fades away. The letter is still there. It could be black with a little bit of dirt and dust or whatever. The Rebbe said, the letter, meaning the Judaism that every Jew has within himself, is an engraved Judaism. It's not that there's a Jew and something added to him is the Judaism. That's a written letter, ink on parchment, two separate entities. He said the Jewish Judaism of the Jew is engraved within the Jew. It can never rub out. Can never rub out. The only thing that can happen sometimes is the Jew gets covered a little bit with worldly dust, the dust that dampens, what ruins a little bit and makes it dirty. The job of a shliach is to go and blow off the dust. Sometimes, this the Rebbe didn't say already, but sometimes you could blow the dust and it goes away. Sometimes you need a little shovel. Sometimes you need a big shovel. Sometimes you need a bulldozer to take off the mud that's covering the Jew. But the bottom line is the Judaism of the Jew is part and parcel of the Jew. And so that's what it says, Zeis Chukas HaTorah. Now the Rebbe explained, Zeis Chukas HaTorah. Torah cannot be written letters. Torah is actually engraved letters. What does it mean, Torah is engraved letters? Like we just mentioned, the Judaism of a Jew, the Yiddishkeit of a Jew, is really the existence of the Jew. A Jew is always a Jew. A Jew can never rub out in their Judaism. They can be covered. This neshama can be covered a little bit with dirt, you know what I mean? But it's not something that could become erased, God forbid. And therefore, this is very important. When you speak to another Jew, you're not coming to the Jew who's totally religious, let's say. You're not coming to another Jew to create Judaism within them. That's there already. It's part and parcel of their existence. What we need to do sometimes, a Jew that's not religious yet or observant yet or whatever, sometimes they're covered with a little bit of dust. But you're coming to them, you're not to create something new. You're just removing the blockage of what really makes the Jew what the Jew is. So that's the aspect of Zeis Chukas HaTorah, the letters of Chakika, that really every single Jew is. Then as the Torah moves on in the laws of the red heifer, The Torah says like this: Zeis HaTorah Adam ki yamas ba'oil. A few psukim down. In Pasuk 14, Yudalid, Pasuk says like this. These are in the laws of impurity. Zeis HaTorah Adam ki yamas ba'oil. These are the laws if a person dies in a tent, because it's in the same house, the same tent, everything in the house becomes impure. Because we know, God forbid, if there's a dead body in a house, in a building, everything in the building becomes impure. But the Gemara says an interesting expression. It says, Zeis HaTorah Adam ki yamos ba'oil. So Zeis HaTorah mean this is the law if somebody dies in a tent. Okay, so whatever is in the tent, as long as the dead body is there, becomes impure. But the Gemara says a different statement. The Gemara explains it a little bit different. It says, Zeis HaTorah, if you want to learn Torah properly, Adam ki yamas, you have to die for it. You have to die if you're able to learn Torah. What does that mean? In a practical language, we're not talking about anybody should just die. What it means is like this. A person should be completely devoted and dedicated to learning Torah. You have to die for it. You know, people say, oh, I would die for this food. I would die for this thing, or I would die for this. What it means here in a deeper sense is a person needs to actually give up the life for the study of Torah. That's what it means. Adam ki yamas ba'oil. Because if you think about it, let's try to analyze this for a second. Torah is God's wisdom, godly wisdom. It's infinite. It's infinite. How is it possible that a finite mind of a human being, no matter how brilliant you are, you're still a finite human being? How is it possible that a finite human being is able to understand infinite godly wisdom? How is it possible? So the answer is, that's what God's greatness in Torah is. God's greatness of Torah is that he could take his infinite wisdom, and this is very unique. God takes his infinite wisdom of Torah, and he puts it into logic to the extent, to show you how the extreme is, a 5-year-old kid could learn Chumash. They could learn Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'aretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. They learn in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And the kid understands it. According to Torah, he understands it. He gets 100 on the test. And he understands that pasuk of Chumash that he learns in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. At the same time, the greatest of minds, Rabbi Akiva, Rambam, all the earlier great sages who are super brilliant, had no understanding at all what it means. It was too great for a human mind to understand. So Hashem allows us to study Torah. But the Gemara is saying over here, what the pasuk is teaching us, a guy will die for it, means a person who is very coarse, very mundane, very into physical pleasures. They're into food and cars and houses, and this is they're living for that. If they're so involved that their whole being is involved in worldly temptations, stop to think for a minute. So how are they able to understand something godly? How are they able to understand something godly if they're so low and crass that they're only interested in physical things, physical pleasures? The only way, and therefore in Pirkei Avos in the 6th chapter, when it speaks about acquiring Torah, it says eating a little bit and sleeping a little bit, basically becoming empty and devoid from physical pleasures. So that's what the Gemara pasuk says. Adam ki yamas ba'oil Torah. If you want to acquire Torah, the pasuk says you have to realize Adam ki yamas ba'oil. A person has to die for it. You find lahavdil, interestingly, when you read about the great scientists, not today's, I'm talking about yesteryear, the people that invented medicines and all that stuff. Most of them, you should know, lived the life of deprivation. They weren't into the physical world. They were more interested in the intelligence, in the understanding, in the education, in the learning. Because basically, if somebody is too involved in having a good time by eating and drinking on cars and houses and everything else, so you're not refined enough to be able to learn God's wisdom. As it is, God is doing us an infinite favor that he's taking his infinite wisdom and putting it into a physical brain that we can understand it. But still, if a person is full of themselves, full of physical enjoyment, it's a very difficult, if you think about it, it'd be very difficult to be refined enough to learn godliness. And that's why the Pasuk says, another thing about Tumas Mess, and then we'll go to the next Parsha. The Medrash says, when God was teaching Moshe Rabbeinu the laws of purity and impurity. So when he came to the laws of a dead body, Moshe Rabbeinu niskarkem upanav shel Moshe. It simply means like Moshe Rabbeinu's face dropped. And he said to Hashem, Zu b'ma tehei taharase. How are you going to purify such of impurity of a dead body? It's the lowest level of impurity. How can you purify such a low level of an impure body? So let's explain this, what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to understand. What is spiritual death? We're talking about not only physical death, everything in Torah applies constantly every day. There's a concept of a dead body. We say every time, it's a pasuk in verse Chanan, in the book of Devarim, but every time we take out the Sefer Torah to read, we say, Va'atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokechem chayim kulchem hayei. You are connected to Hashem. Va'atem adveikim, you are connected to Hashem. Chayim kulchem hayei, you're all alive today. The definition of life is some true definition, emes, is when it's eternal. Something which is partially true, sometimes true, even most of the time true. In Torah, it's not emes. Emes, like we discussed recently in the previous weeks, emes is eternity. If it's either always true or never true. The word sometimes true is really a contradiction of terms. Because if it's true, it's always true. Like the morals and ethics of Torah, because God gave it to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, the morals and ethics of Torah applied in day one of creation, applies in the year 2023, and is going to apply in the year 5000, whatever. It's going to always apply. Secular morals and ethics, because they're made by people for people, they keep changing. Whatever works for the generation, they'll change it. What was completely immoral in the 50s is a mitzvah today. I mean, you have all these types of things. So, emes is what it's eternal. The only real existence in the world is Hashem. Hashem was, is, and will be. Every other thing in the world, there was a time before 5,783 years ago, it didn't exist. And then it existed. So therefore, the fact that it wasn't always existing, and there'll come a time that it won't exist again. So then basically that means even while it's existing, it's not a real existence. And this Chassidus proves from a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and not in Sanhedrin, it's a Mishnah that says rivers, they needed in the Beis HaMikdash what was called Mayim Chaim. In fact, in this week's Parsha, it says Mayim Chaim, I'll call it natural living water. And the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, rivers that dried up, there are certain rivers that dried up once in 7 years, meaning 6 years they flowed, and 1 year, the 7th year, they dried up. So the Mishnah says that those rivers that dried up once in 7 years were not allowed to be used even for the 6 years when the water was flowing. Why not, the Mishnah says? Because the fact that at one time it dried up shows that even when it flowed, it wasn't real. It wasn't emes. Because if it's emes, it would constantly be. And the fact that it's not constantly being, that means it's not emes. So the real existence, the only existence that's real, is God. He always was, is, and will be. Therefore, the pasuk says like this: when you're connected to God, which is you're connecting, like we said before, in a engraved letter, you are one with Hashem. Then Chayim Kulchem Hayim. Then the pasuk says you're all alive, because then you're really existing. The body of a human being is not a real existence, because before you were born, you weren't. And after we die, after 120 years, we're also not there. Okay? So there's a time we are, there's a time we aren't. So then even when we are, we're not real. So therefore, what is the real life? The real life is a person who is connected to Hashem. Atem adveikim Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. It means then we become alive, because we're connected to Hashem. What does death mean? A living body is warm. A dead body is cold. Coldness to Judaism is called death. Warmth to Yiddishkeit is called alive. You're living, you're alive, you're warm. There's life in you. Moshe Rabbeinu, here is the laws of impurity. He comes to Hashem and says, something which is cut off from the source. It's cut off from the lifeline. How in the world can you bring that back? How can you purify it? So he says like this. In fact, it's the word for physical in Hebrew in Torah is gashmius. Gashmius is the Hebrew word for physical. The word mundane in Hebrew is chumrius. Chumrius means mundane. It's even lower than gashmius. It says that chumrius is the same letter as the word chamor, a donkey. Chumrius, which means a person is coarse, indulge in worldly desires and temptations. That's called chumrius. So it says in Svarim that chumrius is the same letters as chamor, which means a donkey. What's unique about a donkey? The Gemara says, Chamra betkufis Tammuz kriroi. A chamor, the Gemara says, even in the month of Tammuz, okay, in the season of Tammuz, when it's summer, it's hot. A donkey, the Gemara says, is always cold. Even in Chamra, a donkey. Afila betkufis Tammuz, even in the month of Tammuz, which is hot, kriroi, the donkey is cold. What does that mean in the spiritual sense? Chassidus explains. If you're involved in chumrius, if you're a chamor, if you're a donkey, from the word chomer, you're coarse. So even when the sun is shining in Tammuz, right? The sun shines in the summer. And as the pasuk says in Tehillim, Shemesh umogein Hashem Elokim, Hashem is likened to the Shemesh, to the sun. The protective shield around the sun is called Elokim, David HaMelech says in Tehillim. Even in the month of Tammuz, when godliness is shining, this chomer, the person who's mundane and coarse, is always cold. What does it mean it's always cold? They're separated from Hashem. They're separated from Hashem. And it's interesting. It says in Sfarim, the word emes, right? Aleph mem sof. Emes means truth. God is truth. Torah is truth. If you take away the aleph, which represents Hashem, one is Hashem. If you take away the aleph, if you take away God from emes, you end up with mess. You end up with dead. You end up being dead. So that's what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand. How in the world can somebody who's cut off from the lifeline of holiness, that they're cold to Judaism completely? And therefore we find another interesting connection to the Parsha. There was an epidemic. Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem told him, make a nachash, make a snake, put it on a pole, and whoever looks at the snake would go, because the snakes were biting the Jewish people. So Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, take a stick, make a picture of a snake on it, an image of a snake, and whoever gets bitten by the snake will look at that snake and they'll get healed. There's a snake and the scorpion. In fact, in the Pasuk, when it speaks about the Midbar, the 40 years the Jews were in the desert, it says it was Nachash, Sada, Va'akrov, snakes and scorpions. The Gemara says, what's the difference between the venom of a snake and the venom of a scorpion? According to Torah, a scorpion is more dangerous than a snake if they bite. The Gemara says, Nachash, the poison, the venom is warm. The akrov, the middle two letters are kar, which means cold. The venom of a scorpion is cold. What does that mean in Judaism? It says a desert full of snakes and scorpions of negativity. Sometimes you can be cold to your Judaism. You're cold. That you could be called a scorpion. You're cold to Judaism. Sometimes a person could be very enthusiastic about worldly temptations. Then they're called a snake. So what is this whole concept of nachash? Because a Jew needs to be enthusiastic about godliness. I hope you'll be able to see this. Okay. You probably won't be able to see it. Okay, but anyway, if you take the word Bilam and under it put the word Amalek, okay? Take the word Bilam and put underneath it the word Amalek. There's 4 letters each. If you read it top ways, it's Beis, Lamed, Ayin, Mem. But if you cut the letter in half vertically, then the 2 top letters is Beis Lamed, and Amalek is Ayin Mem. So again, you could read it Bilam. The same thing with Amalek, Ayin Mem, Lamed Kuf. So you have Bilam and Amalek written out this way, horizontal, and vertical, you also have the same thing, Bilam and Amalek. If you take the 2 words, Yira, fear, and Ahava, the same way, you write out Yud, Reish, Aleph, Hey, and then you write under it Aleph, Hey, Beis, Hey, then again, you have Yira and Ahava, fear and love, and if you do it down vertical, it's the same thing, Ahava and Yira. It's a very interesting thing in Torah. What does this mean? It says in Sfarim, Bilam and Amalek. Amalek was the nation of Amalek that wanted to destroy the Jewish people. They were the first ones to start up with the Jewish people, Amalek. Bilam wanted to eradicate the Jews. So any way you look at it, Bilam, Amalek, you're all interconnected. What is the uniqueness of Amalek? Coldness. We learned many times, Amalek, it says, Asher karcha baderech, coldness. Amalek throws coldness into Judaism. What's the spiritual Amalek that each one of us have to deal with on a daily basis? There's Amalek within us. What is this Amalek? Asher karcha, it throws coldness into Judaism. It doesn't say it's smart enough not to come along and say, don't keep Judaism. Because they know we won't listen. What he says is, do it, but do it coldly. Do it. What do you get so excited about Torah mitzvahs for? But how do you overcome that? With love and fear. Because fear and love is actually, that's the warmth when you love something and you have awe of, not fear like they're going to hit you, awe, awesomeness of Hashem. So then you get all excited about doing Yiddishkeit. So Moshe Rabbeinu comes to God and he says, listen, God, I have a problem. This Tumis mess, a Jew who is completely disconnected from Judaism. How are you going to bring him back? How are you going to purify him? So Hashem says, you know what? There's something called the red heifer. And the red heifer can purify even the impure. Even the impure could purify. Even the impurity of the dead body, which is the ultimate cutting off, separation from life. Nevertheless, a Jew is always a Jew because it's engraved within them. So maybe they got cut so much mud, you need a bulldozer. But the bottom line is, the Jew, you never give up on a Jew, even a Jew that you think is dead. And that's what the Rebbe has always told us. There's no such thing as a dead Jew. Many religious people say, don't bother with them. They're not going to do it. They're not going to listen. They're not interested. They're anti. You know what? The Torah teaches us even somebody who is dead, spiritually dead, can still be revived. He can still become purified. It's not a problem. Okay, let's move along to the next Parsha, which is the Parsha Balak. So there's a question all the commentaries ask. Balak was a Rasha that hired Bilam to come to curse the Jews. And the Gemara, Balak hated the Jews more than Bilam did. Bilam did it for the honor, for the money. Balak hated the Jews for real. How in the world do we have a Parsha in Chumash called Balak? Yet Korach, we read last, Korach was a Jew. It's also a question, why do you name a Parsha Korach? Yisrael was the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu, and he converted and he became a Jew. To call a Parsha in Torah Balak, it doesn't sound right. Why should Hashem call a Parsha in Torah by the name of Balak? It doesn't make sense. But it does make sense. Because what the Torah wants is not only to elevate holy things, the Torah wants us to take things which are really low, really, really low, and transform them to Kedusha. Now, let me preface this by explaining as follows. There's a rule, okay, in physics, but Torah has it even stronger. The higher the thing, the further it falls. Okay? If you have a wall and the wall falls down, the top part of the wall, the higher part of the wall, falls further away from the original place of the wall. The bottom of the wall, the lowest part of the wall, just falls down a little bit. The top falls further. Chassidus explains, Kol hagavaya b'yeser, the higher the thing, neifa lamata yeser, falls down further. The higher the thing, the lower it falls. Now, when Hashem created the world, he let things fell down into evil. But right now, until Mashiach comes, we can elevate a certain level of evil. That's called klipas noiga. Total evil, things that the Torah forbids, we cannot elevate. We don't have that power yet until Mashiach comes. So therefore, Torah says it's forbidden. If you can't elevate it, then it's forbidden. The whole purpose of doing things is to elevate the world. If you can't do it, you can't elevate it, so then you're not allowed to do it. That's why things are forbidden. But over here we have like this. Balak, if you analyze it, interestingly, Balak was the ancestor of Rus. Rus was a descendant from Balak, the king of Moab, who hated the Jews. Rus, the famous Rus, was the ancestor of David HaMelech, and she was the ancestor of Mashiach. Where does she come from? From Balak. It says clearly she was a descendant of Balak. She was Brusa Moaviyah, from Balak Melech Moab. Not only that, but Mashiach, in the Parsha Balak, when Bilam is supposed to be cursing the Jews, and instead he's giving them the unbelievable, phenomenal brachas. We don't have any brachas, nowhere in Torah's brachas like the ones from Bilam. What is Bilam prophesizing about? We'll discuss this soon if we have time. What is Bilam prophesizing about? The coming of Mashiach. Balak is the ancestor of Mashiach. Bilam is prophesizing about the coming of Mashiach. That is the ultimate transformation of evil in the fullest extent of a Balak, the Jew hater, that hired Bilam to come and curse the Jews because he thought Bilam would be able to curse them and they would all die. This is the transformation of the Torah. Torah says, you know why we're calling this Parsha Balak? Because this Parsha talks about the coming of Mashiach. Most of the Rambam elaborates on this a lot in Hilchos Malachim. A lot of the psukim at the end of the Parsha, of the last prophecy of Bilam, Darach Kechav Yaakov, all that the Rambam says deals with Mashiach. Why is the Torah calling the name of the Parsha Balak? Because the Torah wants to teach us. We can't do it. We can't take forbidden things and elevate it. But the Torah is telling us conceptually. Why is the Torah calling it Balak? Because the function of the Jew is to take the Bilam, the Balaks of the world, and make Mashiach out of it. Rus is to take the Bilams out of the world and transform the evil to talk about Mashiach. And that's why the Torah calls it Balak, because the Torah is telling us that's all about Mashiach. Another thing, which is just in passing, we know that it says, Bilam said, Matevo Alecha Yaakov Mishkanesacha Yisrael. It's a very famous pasuk. We say it at the beginning of davening every day in Karbanis. Matevo Alecha Yaakov. Why did he say how beautiful are your tents? So Rashi says in the Medrash, and he says that he saw Bilam, the guy, the Jew hater, noticed the remarkable greatness in a Jew. Bilam saw when they were in the desert and they all had tents. All the Jews set up their tents in a way that nobody's door faced somebody else's door. That nobody could look in to somebody else's business, minding everybody's business. Because of that, the Gemara says, and the Medrash elaborate, Bilam said, the pasuk Matevo Alecha Yaakov, how good are your tents, Yaakov, your dwelling places, Yisrael. What made him say it? He saw modesty amongst the Jewish people. What's the lesson for us? People always talk about tznius, which people generally define in modesty in the clothes that you wear and the attire that you wear, but that's not true. only. Tznius is in our thinking. Tznius, modesty is the way we think, the way we talk, the way we act. Minding somebody else's business, mixing into somebody else's business is not modest. How do we know it's not modest? Because even Bilam realized the Jews set their tents up in the desert that they didn't face each other's doorway. They made sure that they can't look into anybody else's house. They didn't mind mix into everybody's business. They weren't what's called, either in Yiddish it's called a yenta, a person, or in Torah it's called a rechilas. Rachel is a peddler. And the Gemara says, why is a gossiper called rechilas? Because he's a peddler. What does a peddler do? He goes to the wholesale market, loads up goods, and then he goes sells it retail. What does a gossiper do? He loads up lashon hara in one place and goes unburdens it in another place. So that's the whole inyan of Bilam. Even the guy realized what was the greatness of the Jew, the whole aspect of modesty. Worrying about not mixing into somebody else's business. I'm talking about in the physical sense. Spiritually, we have to help each other out. But they didn't go look into everybody else's business and mind the business and talk about it. But while we're on this pasuk, there's another fundamental thing that the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, and the Alter Rebbe speaks about that, we're learning now in the Chukat-Balak. The Alter Rebbe says like this. When Hashem changed Avram's name from Avram to Avraham, he said to him, your name should not be called Avram anymore. Kiyim Avram. Avram is your new name. Therefore, the Gemara says, because the Torah says your name will not be called anymore. You should not call you Avram, only Avraham. So therefore, the Gemara says, whoever calls Avraham Avram is transgressing a negative commandment. It's not one of the 613, but before it's transgressing a negative commandment. So the Gemara asks the question, if that's the case, when Hashem changed Yaakov's name to Yisrael, Hashem said also, your name will not be called Yaakov anymore. Your name should be called Yisrael. So the question is, if somebody calls Yisrael, Yaakov, they should also be transgressing a sin. And today we know there's a lot of Yaakovs and there's a lot of Yisraels. So the Gemara answers, but over there in the next pasuk, Hashem called him again Yaakov. When Hashem changed the name Avram to Avraham, he never called him ever again Avram. The name became only Avraham. The pasuk right after Hashem changed his name, and he said, now your name will be Yisrael, not Yaakov. The next pasuk Hashem calls him Yaakov. So obviously, so this explains, there's a avodah of Yaakov, and there's a avodah of Yisrael. Mateva Alocha Yaakov, how good are your tents? Yaakov, Mishkanei Sacha Yisrael, your dwelling place Yisrael. What does that mean? By a Jew, there's a level of Yaakov, there's a level of Yisrael. You can have Jews that are called Yaakov, Jews that are called Yisrael. But the truth of the matter is, every single Jew within themselves has the avodah, the work of Yaakov and the word of Yisrael. What does that mean? Let's understand why the name was given as Yaakov and why the name was given as Yisrael. When Yaakov Avinu was born, in Parsha's Toldos, the pasuk says, there were twins. Esav was the firstborn. It came out first. Yaakov was holding on to the heel of Esav. So therefore, they called him Yaakov. What does Yaakov mean? Okay means a heel. What is the Yud? There's a lot of interpretation. We'll see. Why was he called Yisrael? After he fought with the angel of Esav, and he won in Parshas Vayishlach, So then the Malach called his name Yisrael. And then Hashem gave him the name of Yisrael. And he said, why were you called Yisrael? Kisarisa im Elokim v'anoshim v'tucham. Because you fought with angels of Esav and you won. So you have the name Yaakov, which means heel. Yisrael means fighting evil and winning. But if you take the name Yisrael, you have, and you switch around the letters, you get what's called Li Rosh. Li Rosh, the letters Yisrael. Li Rosh means it's a head. Li to me is a head. Yisrael is Sar Kel, the officer of God. Yosher Kel means the straight of God. Yud at the beginning of the word, Chassidus explains in Hebrew, means continuous. He's continuously Li Rosh, continuously Sar Kel, continuously the lofty levels. So by a Jew, there's a level of Yaakov and there's a level of Yisrael. What's the difference in a practical sense? Yaakov, heel, symbolizes Kabbalah's oil, doing it because God said so, not because we understand it. Like it says at the beginning of the Parsha, Zeis Chukas Torah, even the logical mitzvahs of Torah, we don't do because we understand it. Because the way we understand it is not the way God understands it. Why do we do mitzvahs? Because even the logical mitzvahs, because God said so. That's chukah, Kabbalah's oil. Yaakov represents the heel, which represents, number one, acceptance of the yoke. It also, Chassidus explains, represents self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh. And Chassidus gives an analogy for this. Do you imagine if God would come to the head of the person and say, okay, I want you to take your head and put it into boiling hot water. All of a sudden, the head starts working. Does he mean me? Maybe he means somebody else. Maybe he means after it cools down. Maybe. Once the head gets in the way, you can rationalize whatever you want. The heel is basically brainless. There's no seichel in the heel. The seichel is in the head. The intelligence is in the head. In the foot, there's no intellect. Hashem says to the foot, put yourself into boiling hot water. It doesn't understand anything. It goes into boiling hot water. This is Mesiras Nefesh. Yaakov represents the Avodah of Kabbalah's oil, doing it because Hashem told me to do it. Doing it because this is what Hashem wants. Whether I understand it or not doesn't matter. In a way, Mesiras Nefesh is self-sacrifice. Yisrael means intellect, Li Rosh, the head. Just like a Jew needs to do things because God said so, and we need to do things with self-sacrifice, Yaakov. At the same time, Hashem wants that we should understand what we do. The premise and the prerequisite of everything is Hashem said we do it, period. That's it. Now Hashem says, I want you to understand it. I want Li Rosh, number one. Another thing Hashem tells us with the name Yisrael, that you're going to have a lot of fighting out there. Powerful evil, the angel of Esav. A Jew shouldn't care and get nervous and flustered about fighting this powerful evil force. The Torah says a Jew fights with the Malach of Esav and he wins. Yaakov, Yisrael, that's our forefather. He gave us the strength that you can fight an angel of Esav, which is super powerful, and not care, and you're going to win. So there's a level of Yaakov means action, Kabbalah style, doing it with Mesiras Nefesh. At the same time, Hashem says, I want you to use your intellect. I want you to understand what you're doing, understand how to do it, and get it done. So you need a combination of Yaakov and Yisrael. Therefore, in the same pasuk over here in our Parsha, It's a Mateva Alacha Yaakov, Mishkan Yisachar Yisrael. Both are coexisting, the level of Yaakov and the level of Yisrael, and they work hand in hand together. A Jew needs both things. God gave us a head and he gave us a heel. And they work together as one joint body. And therefore we need both things. We need the name Yisrael, we need the name of Yaakov. By Avram, once it was changed from Avram to Avram, there was only the Avodah of Avram. There was no more the work and the Avodah of Avram, of serving Hashem. It was only Avraham. By the way, another interesting point. I mentioned this, I believe, in the previous class a while ago. The word Yisrael, which is Yud, Shin, Reish, Ayin, Reish, Aleph, Lamed, I believe it's the Baal HaTurim at the end of Chumash says this, if I'm not mistaken. In the word Yisrael, you have all the patriarchs and matriarchs of, the four fathers, the three fathers and the four mothers. Yud stands for Yitzchak and Yaakov. Shin stands for Sarah. Reish stands for Rivka and Rachel. Aleph stands for Avraham. And Lamed stands for Leah. So in the name Yisrael itself, Yud, Shin, Reish, Aleph, Lamed, you have Yud is Yitzchak and Yaakov. The Shin is Sarah. Reish is Rivka and Rachel, Aleph is Avram, and Lamed is Leah. So you have in the name of Yisrael, you have all the patriarchs and matriarchs. Okay, now another interesting thing in this Parsha, that it's a bunch of stuff you could talk about, but at the end of the Parsha, we mentioned he speaks about Mashiach. Okay, so it says like this. Okay. At the end of Layat, there's a whole bunch of things in chapter 24, starting from chapter 14. But there's a few psukim of it without elaborating on each one of the pasuk. There's a pasuk, for instance, Dorach Kechav Yaakov. A star will shoot out from Yaakov. So the Rambam says, who does that refer to? Mashiach. All these psukim at the end, when Bilam says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen to the Jews in the end of days, talking about Mashiach, the Rambam explains how each pasuk refers to Mashiach. Yet in the Gemara, it says, Darach Keichav Yaakov, that the star will shoot out from Yaakov. The Gemara says it refers to every single Jew. It refers to every single Jew. So the question is, the Rambam says it refers to Mashiach. The Gemara says it refers to every Jew. Which one does it belong to? Does it refer to every Jew or does it refer to Mashiach? And the Rebbe explains in many, many sichas. What it's telling us is very simple. Both are right. Every Jew, just like every Jew, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, has a Moshe Rabbeinu within them. Every single Jew has a Mashiach within them. And therefore, it's not a contradiction. Darach Kechav Yaakov refers to every single Jew. And Darach Kechav Yaakov refers to Mashiach. And it's not a contradiction because every single Jew has a Mashiach within them. And this explains when we take out the Sefer Torah, when we take out the Sefer Torah and Yom Tif, we say the Kayim Banu Akosov in the Rebbeinu Shalom that we say. It should be fulfilled upon us, the pasuk that says V'nacha olav ruach Elokim, that the Spirit of God will rest upon him. We say the Kayim Banu. Okay, it should become fulfilled within us, the pasuk that says the Spirit of God will rest on him. The pasuk in Yeshaya is referring to Mashiach. V'nacha olav ruach Elokim, that the Spirit of God is going to rest upon him. It's over there talking about Mashiach in the book of Yeshaya. Okay, we read in the last day of Pesach. Yet we say v'yikayim banu, that it should be fulfilled within us. That pasuk that speaks about Mashiach. How could that be? So again, the Rebbe explains the same thing. The Rebbe said both things are the same thing. The pasuk is talking about Mashiach, granted. Darach Kechav Yaakov is speaking about Mashiach, that the stars shot out of Yaakov. But at the same time, there's a Mashiach within each one of us. And if there's a Mashiach within each one of us, the pasuk refers to both things. What does this mean? Could talk about it for a long time, but the bottom line is, every single Jew has hidden powers of a Moshe Rabbeinu and a Mashiach. Like the Rebbe explains in many siches, Moshe Mem Shin Hey equals 345. Mashiach equals 358. What's the difference between 345 and 358? 13, which is the word Echad. Every Jew has a Moshe Rabbeinu, a hidden power, an infinite power like Moshe Rabbeinu had. We have that within us. Every Jew has a Mashiach within us. Our mission and role and purpose in the world is to reveal the Moshe Rabbeinu within us and to reveal the Mashiach in us. Because when every person reveals the Mashiach within them, then ultimately Mashiach will come. So every Jew has a Mashiach. It's a remarkable concept that I've explained. The power of a Jew, that every single man, woman, and child has a Moshe Rabbeinu within them, the power of Moshe Rabbeinu, the power of Mashiach, it's hidden. It's covered over with dust. Our function is enthusiasm, life, not to be disconnected from God, not to be dead spiritually, but to be alive spiritually, connect to Moshe Rabbeinu, connect to Mashiach, and then that power is revealed within us. So therefore, when a person is facing challenges in life, the angel of Esav is coming to fight them. So this Parsha is teaching us there's a Yaakov, the Yisrael, that could fight, and the angel, we're all Yisrael. We could fight that angel. Everyone has a Moshe Rabbeinu within us. Everybody has a Mashiach within us. There's unbelievable powers that each one of us possess. We just have to reveal them. Okay, Mirza Shem, Wednesday night will be a class at 8:30 in Halacha and Tanya. Welcome back, everybody. And we had a break for about 10 days. But anyway, welcome back, and we'll see you Mirza Shem Wednesday, hopefully. And until then, have a great day. Great week.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you.
Rabbi. Thank you. Have a great week.